Welcome back. Here's where you left off.
Good morning, and welcome to the second live stream. And good morning, Derek. How are you today?
Good morning. Got the coffee.
Yeah.
It's a brisk Sunday morning, ready to go. What are we talking about today, Leonard?
Today we're going to talk about genres, fantasy versus sci-fi versus everything else. This is kind of funny because since the beginning of this podcast, we've been reviewing sci-fi and sci-fi. I think that's it.
No,
mystery. Mystery.
Admittedly, we started off a lot with sci-fi in this show, and we do really, both of us lean a little bit towards the sci-fi genre, admittedly. But we've done mystery, we've done intrigue, we've done suspense, we've done. I think the only thing that we haven't done yet is probably romance. I think directly as a genre.
Some of the sci-fi does have romance, so would that consider romance? But
no, I think it has to be like a mashup if we do that.
You need to have Fabio in the front of the book, right?
We have to have Fabio in the front of it. Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, so this topic has been, we've been pondering about this topic, fantasy versus sci-fi versus everything else. Because when we started this podcast, we tried to figure out what's the best way to approach this. Because we've been considering strictly just sci-fi. Next, because you like sci-fi, I prefer, I'm a mixture of sci-fi and mystery and thriller, right? And that's why normally that's my jam, like thriller and mystery and suspense. But for me, sci-fi is like a guilty pleasure when I was growing up. So because my mom was a big bookworm, so she only reads mysteries, thriller, and those kind of things. So growing up, I following her reading book list, right? But when I started getting older, I started moving to sci-fi, right? So that's why my taste of books is all over the place. But yours is completely opposite. Yours is just completely sci-fi, right?
Well, I mean, technically, sci-fi, mystery, thriller. I think generally when I have been reading stuff, it was sci-fi. When I was in school, you would do those older books when you're in school to read a much broader range of books. And oddly enough, even then, it wasn't so much romance. I think the only genres that really I have not read much of since school are things like historical fiction, literary fiction, romance, things like that were really not like, I think like you're talking like you're in school reading Romeo and Juliet, things like that. Those sort of things I haven't really done, although that's not to say I haven't. I mean, I've been a fan of the Fourth Wing series. I think it's a good job there. To mix both fantasy and romance into it. Rebecca Yarros is really good at that. Even though I could totally just take her writing and say, this is the moment we're doing fantasy, this is the moment we're doing romance, and you just split the two off. You have two separate books. I mean, when she writes, when you're in the romance scenes, and when you're in the fantasy scenes. So there is that. But I mean, for some people, that's very compelling and why they enjoy the mashup between those two. But generally speaking, yes, sci-fi is where I like to sit.
See, for me, the only closest romance books I've read so far is Bridgerton. Yes, I've read the first book of Bridgerton, and also Crazy Rich Asian, and those two are considered romance, right? And to be honest with you, I ended up reading them because it's the popularity of their their shows and the movies. That's why I ended up reading it. But typically, I don't touch them because I need something a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy reading those two books, but I still prefer the suspenseful, the nail biting suspense of just thriller and mystery novels, right? And for us, I'm not sure if you noticed, some of our books that we've been reviewing has both themes of sci-fi and mystery and thriller. I think the closest mystery thriller that we've read so far is actually don't worry about this box of doom, right? So
I'm worried about this
That's
black
it, yeah.
box of doom. Is what you're talking about.
Exactly. So that's the closest we have read so far in the mystery thriller genre so far, right?
And that's a great book. I mean, we haven't gone and read the Jack Ryan kind of books and those sort of stuff, generally speaking, mostly because when you get into mystery thriller, the promise of the writer really matters and whether they pay you off. So the mystery, most people can set up a mystery really easily, but it's the intrigue that goes along with it that makes it a good mystery thriller. And it's a very hard genre to write, I'm sure, because you have to keep the audience engaged and say, here's the promise I'm making to you. You're going to find out something interesting about this person or this place. And by the end of the book, you either give them that payoff or you show them something that was hidden behind the scenes. And that's hard to do. I mean, sci-fi is a lot of ships and whatever, and you can include pretty much any other genre within the sci-fi world. But generally, sci-fi is much more world building, I think. What do you think about that?
You're right. It's definitely world building, especially in the sci-fi side, because you're not limited to Earth or the country or the city. You're limited to how big the universe is, right? And if you're reading anything from the mystery or the thriller side, or even the military thriller and mystery and all those kind of things, even the cop books out there, you are limited to a particular area, right? And you can build a world in that area so fast and so precise that you can do it in a book, right? But in sci-fi, it's the opposite. You have this massive canvas that you are literally touching, and when you put a dot in this massive canvas, that's your beginning, and you can expand it the way you want to expand it. But you theoretically have unlimited space to build it, right? That's in sci-fi. So sometimes if you ending up watching or reading sci-fi novels, they try to limit especially a short series, they limit you in a very small area in that world. But if you look at Expeditionary Force, if you look at Helldivers, you look at other books like that, like massive series books, like we're talking about like more than 5, they keep going, and your world is your oyster. You can be very precise in the description of something, and you have space to talk about it, right? And if you're only dealing with like a conflict, one small conflict, you only have a very fine. You have like 500 pages to do it. You know what I mean? So it's a big thing that you have to consider, especially if you're trying to commit to a series, right?
Well, I mean, you got to remember that sci-fi encompasses a lot of stuff. It encompasses like futuristic concepts, advanced technology, space exploration, time travel, extraterrestrial life. But also, there's a lot in sci-fi that really is great, where there's a lot often of philosophy-related questions about the human conditions, ethics, technological advancement, ethics in AI, things like that. And there's a lot to think about in sci-fi, where it gives you that part to think of. Whereas, fantasy focuses a lot on magical elements, mystical creatures, epic quests. Sort of the themes are like around good versus evil, heroines, and destiny and so forth, right? And it usually the worlds, and don't get me wrong, we're gonna throw out Harry Potter here, because you could definitely world build in fantasy and make something really great. But often there's a lot of rules and laws in these worlds and magic and the environments, and they can like range from forests to medieval castles to kings, queens, all these sort of darker characters that you would get. Whereas in sci-fi, usually aliens are either goodies or baddies. You either get one or the other. There's not really a lot of gray in there, right?
Yeah, you made a good point though, because fantasy has a tendency to be in the fantasy world. you have creatures, you have humans, you have wizards and all that stuff, like you said. Let's use an example of Harry Potter. Harry Potter has this, theoretically supposed to be real time, right? And they only become fantasy because if you remove the magic, if you remove the time travel, if you remove all that, the whole thing is actually just coming out of age book, right? But as soon as you put something like wizards, beasts, monsters, those kind of things, then it becomes a fantasy genre with coming an age theme to it, right? And that's not a problem. That's pretty cool. I read the books. Granted, it took me 10 years to read the book series, but I read it. And if you compare that to sci-fi, it's literally just same thing. You have your characters that's trying to do a quest, for example, but that quest is just the underlining, it's the catalyst of the story. But if you remove the flying ships, going to space, if you get rid of if you get rid of the space stations, the spaceships, if you get rid of the going to the next planet, you literally just have a fantasy. But if you kept if you get the aliens, it's a fantasy. So there's a particular line that you have to cross becomes a different genre. Don't you agree? Or am I just talking out of my...
I mean, there's often a very strong fantasy component in sci-fi because of aliens. But if you remove aliens out of that and you just leave it as humans, like just as an example, take like a colony ship going from one planet to another, it's actually more a direct examination of the human condition and humans surviving than any other external force. The fact that they're on a ship doesn't matter. It's more about community. It's more about the human condition in sci-fi. And that's actually, interestingly, how something like Star Trek works, because when they're on the ship and they're just doing their own thing as a crew, it's very much about the human condition. And yes, they encounter the aliens and they have to deal with that and so forth. And that's when it moves into fantasy. But it switches back and forth into those pieces a great deal. And that's a lot of what people enjoy about it, right?
Yeah, no, you have a point there. If a space travel in sci-fi world and there's no aliens, it's just human conditions, how to survive, right? And and in fantasy, if you get rid of the well, in fantasy, actually, I just answered my own question. in fantasy, if you do the same thing, the only difference is instead of going through space, you're going through a journey. Like, let's say, Lord of the Rings. The journey. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey. The journey they have to go to Mordor, right? And they captured that as the human aspect of the endurance, right? And it's kind of I feel like that the genre of fantasy going to sci-fi, or even just like a non let's say coming of age. Let's just use that as a starting point.
Well, let's just use a different example. Right? Let's use it as not a sci-fi. Well, okay, sci-fi. Let's use Back to the Future as an example, as that's really about the human condition, and there's a mixture of time travel in it. But really what it about boils down to is family, really, in the end, in doing that. And so you can have fantasy and sci-fi always mesh. And I think those two mesh the easiest together, because when you talk about something like mystery and thriller, I think of mystery and thriller as the Rubik's Cube of genres, because it's usually centered around solving a crime or uncovering a secret. And then they have the themes of like suspense, deception, or justice, right? And usually those settings are in a community, realistic environment where like cities or towns, and I mean places that people will be familiar with, because they want to be able to create tension in environments where somebody be like, that could be my neighborhood, right? To do that, to feel like they're involved in the story, right?
Yes, you're correct. Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe thriller and mystery is a Rubik's Cube. You have to, there's certain twists and turns that you have to do to solve the puzzle, right? And that's some people see that as the exciting part, is to solve that mystery, to solve that equation, right? And in the fantasy and the sci-fi, you have an end goal, a very defined end goal. Here's a great example. Let's look at The Martian. The character itself got stranded in Mars. He needs to go back home. The NASA and all the space agencies are working together to bring Mark Watney back home. He still have the crew of the crew trying to the Hermes. Yeah. So they're flying back to Earth. Next thing they found out that Mark Watney's still alive. Now they have the guilt, right? And when they had the mission to a plan to bring them home, but NASA says no, we can't do that because we still have to bring the crew home, and they have a mentality of, okay, we sacrifice one to save many. Like that's literally the decision they have to make. But they ended up making the decision, hey crew, it's your choice. Do you want to go grab him or not? They decide to go back, and that becomes a defined definition of what needs to get done in sci-fi and fantasy. But in the mystery side, you have a fork in the road. They give you that you feel the character has to make a decision, go right or go left, right? If he goes right, there's a bunch of scenarios that they actually lay it out. If he goes left, there's a bunch of scenarios you have to lay out. So you as a reader, you feel like you have invested in that decision. Is he going right or is he going left, right? So it really depending on the mentality that you're trying to what do you want to do when you read a book? In other words, for me, I like that concept of let me make that decision for you. If you made a decision for me, if I keep reading, but he ended up turning left instead of turning right because I want him to turn right, now I'm pissed off and mad. It's like, why did you do that? You have all this evidence that you can go turn right and you can finish this right now, right? That's sort of like the anticipation of like, oh, okay, if you're second guessing yourself, would I make the same decision?
Well, yeah,
right?
I mean, I like the fact that like when you're reading a book and there's a situation put in front of you, and you're thinking, what would I do in that situation? And when the writer comes through with whatever their solution is, did you figure out that solution, or did the writer walk you into that solution? Or even if you agree with that solution, because sometimes you're like, that was lazy writing, or it was a bad solution, or I came up with a far better one. That's sort of fun part of doing when you're looking at mystery thrillers, especially a mystery, because it's a Rubik's Cube and you want to figure it out. And so the payoff at the end is really important, that the writer brings that through for you, because if you don't get that, even in sci-fi, you can have a battle with aliens and maybe the aliens wipe out the humans. It still can be satisfying as long as the writer fulfills that promise, right? But in mystery and thriller, if it's a weak fulfillment for you, if the entire time the writer says, gives the hint like the brother did it, the brother did it, the brother did it, and in the end the brother did it, it's not fulfilling because you haven't figured anything out. You're just like, you're walking along the hall that says the brother did it every 5 feet while you're reading the book, and you're like, what's the point of me reading this, right? So that's where it can fail for me in the genre of mystery thriller. But I like, as you said, to bring that idea of making those choices and deciding which path to go down. I think that's where you enjoy that part of it the most. I like the ability to try to figure it out. But then what I like more is, did the writer figure something out that was better that I didn't figure out when I was reading it? Make sense?
Yeah. Let's use an example. We actually read 3 books considered mystery thriller. The other one is the 0 Hour, right? And the other one, I can't remember the name of the book now. It literally had it on the tip of my tongue. It's the boyfriend, the girlfriend disappeared during the cruise. That one. Oh man, kicking myself that I can't remember the name of the book now. But 0 Hours gave me the feel of, okay, I put myself in the same headspace as the main character, and she had to make a decision, and fulfill that decision making is her inner monologue of doubt, right? And reading that and being part of that decision making and that doubt, it gives me as a reader the opportunity to say, okay, you should do this. Oh my God, I had just moments I just pause. I'm like, is she gonna do it? What's she gonna do? There's the anticipation of the decision that she's gonna make, right? And
we really liked the 0 Hour, and it did, oddly enough, have a romance side. Remember, romance is, out of all the genres, the most flexible genre, because it all, focuses on love, relationships, central romantic plots, themes of passion, heartbreak, like emotional growth, all of these things. You can plot that into any story in any genre, just curtail it in. And so Zero Days was a mystery / romance thriller. Yeah, kind of is all three of those,
Yeah.
depending on how you look at it. But what I mean is that, her emotional piece about her love for her husband there being gone is her motivation in the book. And there's like this romantic aspect, but it's all emotional for her. Everything she does is because she's emotionally impacted by what's happened, and not so much that she's getting into trouble, but because she wants to prove that her husband isn't a baddie.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I don't really consider this a romance genre. I see it as you said, as her love for her husband that was being framed for something that she didn't do. Let me phrase this again. She has a love with her husband. Her husband was killed and trying to frame her for something she didn't do. Okay, and because the husband found out about something about his friend's business. And he's blaming Gabe regarding this hole in the program itself, right? And the cell phone, yeah. And she figured it out, right? And the romance part is just her and her husband, but it became the overarching theme of that emotional, but it's never been part of the whole story. Right, the motivation is her trying to figure out who killed the husband. That's the motivation, not because she has to go to him because he ran away, right? So it's different things. It's the whole book is still considered a mystery and thriller, right? But I don't consider it as a romance because your typical quote unquote checklist for romance is not there. Like if you look at Bridgerton, that's completely different. It's if you read the book 1, it's about a coming of age lady trying to get married, fell in love with the Duke, but the Duke has histories and has a past that she's trying to get away from. Right, but the whole arch of the storyline is them falling in love and moving past the problems that they had in the past. Right, that's in my opinion, that's the difference between both of them. So that's why I don't consider 0 Hour as a romance, more as a thriller mystery. Right, so that's what I think about it.
Yeah, you make a good point, but I want to bring up something else, and I want to ask you about, and this is where we're sort of mainly talking about genres that we're used to, that we like, and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about historical fiction and how you feel about that.
Historical fiction. Okay. I have no issues with her historical fiction because it's taking a history and manipulating it in a way to tell a story, a different perspective of the story. Right. And I never had any issue with that because I kind of like that because it gives you a what if scenario. Right. Here's a great example. It's not a book, but it's actually a TV show called The Man in the High Castle. Right. The scenario.
I was actually thinking For All Mankind, but
For All Mankind too. Yeah.
You're right. The Man in the High Castle is a great example. about that. And I'll give my comment, but go on. I was want to mention For All Mankind because it's another one that's more recent that people might be aware of.
Yeah. So the Man in High Council is it's a historical fiction based on what if the Axis power won. So the perspective is in North America. Germany took over half of North America from the bottom of the United States all the way to Canada. The other half, the Pacific side, was taken over by Japan, right? And the sci-fi about this whole it's a historical fiction sci-fi, right? It's a pretty cool show. You guys have to watch it. It's a the perspective is of a young woman trying to figure out. She got put in this position that she ended up transporting back to a different reality, that the Nazis and the Japanese lost the war, like what our history now. But she lives in an alternative universe saying that the Nazis and the Japanese won World War II, right? And she's trying to piece she's trying to figure out why she's going back for it. Why does she know this this alternate universe thing, right? And one of the characters is part of it. Oh man, I can remember his name. Do you mind checking the main character's name, the guy?
It's been a while since I watched it. I don't actually remember off the top of my head. Yeah, no.
But I did meet him in the Las Vegas airport. I was flying back from a conference in Vegas. She was in the same first class lounge as I am, so it was pretty cool. But his character was literally trying to, in the alternate reality, trying to overthrow the Nazi party so he can be the chancellor of North America. So he becomes the leader, right? But in the same time too, he's trying to fight his own demons because he murdered a lot of people to be where he is, screwed a lot of people. But at the same time, his past is sort of like eating up to him and saying, okay, when the Americans lost the war, they gave him the option, hey, join us or go to jail. He chose to join them because he has a family, right? And now all the decision he made at that point to where at the end of the show, at the end of the series, he's trying to cover it up, or he's trying to suppress it so he can move forward. He lost his wife, he lost his kids, he lost a lot of people being where he is as the leader of North America, right? So it's a great show. It's an amazing show, but at the same time, he went to our reality, to our history, and he saw the potential if Nazi loss. Right, so he has a family, he has all this stuff. So there's a lot of what if scenarios. So it's a great thing to see, right? That's why it's great. And
so yeah. I have a bit of a line for me here with this, okay? And it's great that we have these two examples, all right? And I don't know if you've watched For All Mankind. I'm not sure if you've watched that.
I've seen the first few episodes, but I did never continue.
So essentially, the premise for All Mankind is the idea that the Russians made it to the moon before the Americans, and how that would impact policy and what they do ahead of time, which is very interesting because both series revolve around the question of what if, and that's a very interesting piece. The difference between the two series is that they use real people in For All Mankind and suggest different outcomes for those people. And because it's a fictional depiction of their lives, these actual literal people have, with the exception of their own personal lives, how they went in real life, these other lives that they've done. And so these writers are taking these liberties on real people and how they might have gone, right? And a lot of people might misinterpret this and say, oh, that's how this person in real life was. So when I look at historical fiction like The Man in the High Castle, I love it because there's no real historical, real life person who was involved in it. It's just made up people in a different sort of fictional reality, and I really get into that and love it. When For All Mankind, even though I very much enjoy it, I do also, because I'm more of a historian fan, and I look at people and say, Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. That is his claim to fame, right? If you take him and make him into just, arguably
A normal
some
guy.
jerk who never did anything, and he was a terrible guy and he murdered people or whatever, then you take away from his real life achievements as a person, even though you're in a historical fictional context. Now, I'll give a different example here. And I am so upset with myself right now because I feel bad as a Canadian. Who's the writer here that I'm thinking, the Canadian astronaut I'm thinking here?
Oh my God, I'm just Googling. Oh, I hate you so much right now.
Wait, are we both forgetting here? Wow, he is never going to come on the show. He will
Chris
never.
Hadfield.
Chris Hadfield is never going to come on the show, even though we reviewed his books. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Hadfield.
Okay, sorry about that, Chris. We're sorry about that. Chris Hadfield also utilizes real life fictional, real life people within his books. However, he does not redefine those people. He usually stays within the historical context of those people and their he just sort of alludes to them. They might come into his stories a little bit, but he doesn't really rewrite their history per se. He creates sort of fictional characters based on sometimes real life events that he's modified or something, which is fine, doing that. And so I guess as I'm giving these three examples, I like Chris Hadfield's way of doing it more, because you don't devalue the other thing. And for me, when I watch a show about that, I want to honor Neil Armstrong and his achievements and say that's what he did. He earned that. He earned my right to say that's what the man did. And to change it for literary purposes sort of takes away from the guy. And that's where I draw the line for historical. You see my point here?
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying here, but at the same time, I sort of disagree with you in this one because, surprise, surprise.
Surprise. Yeah.
For me, historical fiction is a best way, like I said before, is to show what if scenario. Well, let's talk about Chris Hadfield here. He wrote two amazing books. One is Apollo Murders and the other one's Defector. We both read the book and we both has pros and cons in the book itself. And generally we really like the book. The Apollo Murders was great because it gives you the timeline of the space race. Okay. And that where it started becoming sci-fi or becomes very fictional in this whole thing is how the murders were committed. They went to the moon. I'm not going to ruin the book, but the plotline, but definitely highly recommend it. But it's an astronaut going to space. He murdered a lot of people to get into space. That's literally what it is. And
I mean, no, it's cool. I get it, and I mean, I'm not saying that I disagree with that. Like, for example, I appreciate For All Mankind with the way that they're doing it, and I appreciate the storylines and so forth. But when I sit back and I'm going to judge the series against other series, I have to sit back as somebody who's a minor historian and say, I have to draw the line there for myself personally to say, this person achieved this and, Chris Hadfield did this. And so I think Chris Hadfield walks the line a little better from my perspective than like The Man in the High Castle is a great fiction. I do have problems with the series, but it has nothing to do with the historical accuracy of it. In fact, I very much like the fact that somebody explored that, because often the case is all we look at is a lot of shows that say, we won. Well, what if we didn't win? I mean, if you look historically at it, there are moments within World War II where it could have gone the other way. I mean, it really could have. If certain key events hadn't happened our way, it could have gone the other way. And it's not out of the realm of logical possibilities. And with the multiverse, there has to be a universe where that happened. I like that. I like the fact they went there. That does make it very enjoyable.
I think that's the point of historical fiction, though. It's, again, it gives you the what if. What is the line that you have to draw on and say, okay, this is the official history. How far can we push this so we don't piss off people?
Maybe I need to be specific.
It, in my opinion, it literally ruins the ability of creativity as soon as, okay, this is the history. You can talk about it, you can do whatever you want, but do not go this far. So
let's say take. I'm sure there are books out there that take American presidents and redo them and do something different historically as a what if. Right. And that's fine. But there are people that might misinterpret that as, well, maybe that did happen. Right. Unless you put a specific disclaimer on that. I know what the difference is. Right. And so when I read a book like this, my problem is is that when I'm reading it, I know the historical facts. So let's just take the space race. I'm very familiar with the space race, and I know this happened, this happened. So when they're diverting from it, I can't help but not think, it's not the way it happened, man. It's not the way it went down. Even though I'm appreciating the fact they're trying something different, it's still in the back of my head every time I'm reading it or watching it. What do you think about that?
Okay, I have a question for you. Okay. History. Okay. History and fiction. Treat them separately. Okay. Okay, this is better yet. Can you separate history facts versus history fiction?
Yeah. I can. Yeah. I just said I could. It's hard for me to do it.
It's hard for you to do it.
It's hard for me to do it. Yeah.
But here's the thing, though. If you're a reader, it doesn't matter if you're casual or one of those people that love to read a book once a week thing, right? Like I always says, like, would you judge the book based on historical facts or based on entertainment value? Right?
I think that's my point here. My point is that I can look at it and appreciate what the author is doing, but in the back of my mind, I'm still thinking about the historical fact. And I mean, if they take a unique twist on the historical fact, it might be interesting. But in a lot of ways, what's happened has happened. And like I said, my point was that Man in the High Castle was something that was created that hasn't happened but could have happened. I find more interest in that than the what if. And that's why For All Mankind is interesting. It's a what if. It doesn't mean that I'm completely taken away. In fact, oddly enough, I think For All Mankind actually does a phenomenal job of posing how the United States would have reacted to the Russians getting to the moon first. Because historically speaking, if you look at, as much as our American listeners might be really upset about this, the Russians kicked your ass basically up until you landed on the moon. They did the first of everything, including the first woman in space, the first living thing in space. I mean, all kinds of things right up to the moment where the Americans landed on the moon. If the Russians had landed on the moon, and the way they portray in For All Mankind, it might have created hysteria in America and might have pushed them further into the space area where they had, in the show, they have bases on the moon and tensions with the Russians and so forth. And I can easily see that scenario going on because it was the heat of the Cold War, right? Because up to that point, as much as, the United States got to the moon, they raised the flag, they're like, we did it. Yes, you did it, but the Russians did everything before that first. So how well did you actually do? You went a little further, you did a little landing. It is a very, I'm not diminishing what they did at all. I'm just making an argument here about if you're taking a tally of firsts, you don't really win that. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense. So that's historical fiction for you, ladies and gentlemen.
That is. So what I'm saying to you is that in reality, the cool thing about it is that it actually makes sense that they landed on the moon first. In that reality that they've created, it makes sense from a historical progression sense. And historical sense, it does make sense that they would have gotten there. They were pushing it. The Russians were, and they would have gotten there probably pretty close to when the Americans did, except once again, like the show, the Americans landed on the moon. The Russians were like, oh, this is really hard. And
this is embarrassing.
We don't want to spend any more money. They're just like, whatever, let the the Russians were like, we've done everything but land on the moon. Just let them have it, kind of thing.
We're like, okay, we're kind of losing it. Let's just pump in a lot more money and then hope for the best.
So I guess my point to you is that I like history, and I like absorbing history, and I like the reality of history and doing that. And you learn a lot from history. You learn a lot from learning about history. People that, the adage that fools don't learn from history, fools just repeat it. So
yeah,
if you learn about history, but then
FYI.
I get your point. What?
FYI. I'm just saying, just commentary in today's world society. Sorry.
Yeah, on society. Yeah, no, exactly. But fiction gives you the ability to, as you say, ask the question, what if? And this is why doing a genre like this, even though we haven't really done it on the show, historical fiction, is something I'm
Sorry, we actually
both
did already.
interested in doing.
We did already.
I know we did, but I'm reluctant to. When we did those books with Chris Hadfield, I did it because I really respect Chris Hadfield. He's a Canadian astronaut. He is, a Canadian hero. He is a great guy. And, we love to have him on the show. He wants to come on, even though we couldn't remember his name earlier. We're sorry about that.
Sorry, it's early in the morning.
But,
it's like 9 o'clock.
It's early in the morning.
9:30 in the morning without coffee. So sorry, Chris.
So sorry about that, Chris. But but what he wrote there was great. And normally we've been talking about this subject for a long time because it's one of those I'm most conflicted about genres. I mean, even romance, I'm not conflicted about it. You either get it or you don't. You're either invested in the romance or you're not invested in the romance. With historical fiction, you're either on board with it or you're not. There's no, you can have gray, but there's not a lot to me personally for it, right? I don't think you see it that way, but for me, that's just right.
No, don't get me wrong. I've read romance. I've read comedy. I read Tim and the Shrew, man. It's comedy. So it's one of those things that doesn't matter what genre you're ending up reading. If you like the genre, definitely read that side, right? But I do want to ask you one last question here. All the genres that we've been reading so far, we've touched historical fiction, we've touched sci-fi, we've touched mystery and thriller, we've touched all. The only thing we haven't touched is romance. Or again, there's tons of romance and fiction. Actually, no, we've done fiction. Sorry, we've done fantasy, so we're good. We're good on that one. The only thing we haven't touched is actually romance, right? Would you consider? Because we just talked about this earlier before the live stream that we might have to change one of the books that we've been reading to a romance. Are you prepared to say yes? Let's do that.
Well, I mean, there's nothing against it. Like I said to you earlier, I read Fourth Wing, and that was a great book. Even though I kind of laugh when the romance scenes come into it, and there's just this complete cut in the sentence. One sentence is this, the other sentence is this, and you know completely when you're within it. And I found it very humorous when I was reading it. I'm like, okay, we're going. But I mean, as a genre, there's nothing wrong with that. I think for me on the romance, it's the level of intensity in the romance. I rather intrigue with that versus the passion-driven romances that a lot of
I'm talking about like Fabio style, like front cover type romance.
I'm talking about like that's like intense emotional passion. That's what we're talking about with that genre. That's not something I typically am as interested in. A lot of people are really into that. I understand where that it's a lot of emotional connection that occurs with that. I'm more into like, things like maybe like emotional growth, maybe, or a heartbreak, those sort of things. So out of those three kind of passion, heartbreak, emotional growth, I think the last two there are the ones that I would more gravitate towards from a piece. Because if you write about just a passionate scene for like 8 pages, I get bored. It's just too much.
That's the point of this challenge. And this is the point of the question I have for you. It's like, like there's a lot of romance there that's been mixed with fantasy, because that's the biggest thing right now is romance fantasy. There's romance and sci-fi as well too, but they're not as pronounced. They're not as like in your face. So that's why I'm asking, would you be interested? Because again, we have to remove one of the books in our list because we kind of screwed up in that one. We didn't do our research properly. So
we you know what? Let's just ask the audience to like give us one that is an interesting one, a suggestion maybe from the audience, and maybe we'll consider that one.
Let's consider that one. But I'm definitely challenging you, Derek, that we're gonna be definitely reading a romance book. We're talking about like full-blown romance here. We're gonna choose one book it's only one standalone book, and if the audience actually have a suggestion, we're definitely open to reading those suggestions, because I definitely want to explore this, because we both agree that we don't read romance as much. I actually have 2 books above you regarding like pure blown romance here. So for us to do something like this and talk about it and look at perspective of 2 readers that doesn't read those kind of books, I think it'll be very interesting. It will open a lot of conversations with our audience, and let's just see what happens. So I definitely challenge you, and I'm waiting for your answer to say yes or no to this. You've been skirting around this answer.
What do you mean? I said fine. We actually have had romance in some of the books we've already reviewed, dude. So what are you talking about?
Like what? I'm sorry, like what?
0 days?
0 days is not a romance, by the way. I checked. It's not romance. So you can't categorize it as romance. Sorry, move on. So
I mean, it just depends what you want there, Leonard. I mean, if you want to go Romeo Juliet or
no,
like,
we got
like are we talking 50 Shades of Grey? Are we talking Romeo and Juliet? Like, where in this zone do you want to land, dude?
It's literally the category would be just romance, nothing else beside it.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
That's what I'm challenging. So, audience, leave your comments and let us know which book for us to review, because I'm very, very curious what you guys think. And yeah, I can't believe we screwed up in that book choice. I'm glad that we did, so we can actually do this challenge. I'm excited. So, well, that's it, guys. It's we already eat up half of your breakfast time. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll definitely see you guys next time in our next live show in March, our first Sunday in March. And that will be, now I'm double checking. Derek, can you help me with this one? You're not helping me. Our next live show.
No, I'm just having fun here.
Oh, thanks, buddy. Our next live show will be March 2nd. Cool. So our next live show will be March 2nd at 9 a.m. Eastern. And we'll chat to you guys later. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe, and help others find this podcast by sharing a review. You can find us on all your favorite podcasting apps. Join us again right here where your bookmark left off. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe, and help others find this podcast by sharing a review. You can find us on all your favorite podcasting apps. Join us again right here where your bookmark left off.